Of knowing, and it's when you know, when you're equipped with knowledge, with information, it allows you to make an educated, calculated, and objective decision in terms of what you do, what you don't do, how you use your scarce resource of water, when and where you light fires, what is the protocol, how do you deal with everything. And I know that COVID-19 has thrown everything into the works. So I want to say good morning to you, officer. Welcome to the program and Happy New Year's to you and yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Joseph, and many happy returns to you.
It is always a pleasure when us engaging you and having this conversation as we do on Tuesday. Every Tuesday, we engage the Royal, a different arm of the RGPF, and this week the lots fall on you.
Yes. As
it is traditionally, as we are, because of our terrain, we have a 6 months of dry season, I'm saying traditionally, and a 6 months of rainy season. But we notice, of course, that we've experiencing mixed weather patterns now.
Yes, we have very irregular weather patterns presently.
But certainly the issue of the dry season, fires, and all of those different things, it comes into play. And it is traditionally a very busy time for the RGPF, isn't it?
Yes, it is a very busy time for the fire department. And what I can say is, on record for 2020, we had an increase in the number of bushfires being reported from 120 to a total of 150 bushfires. Part of that, we believe, was attributed to the fact that COVID-19 had more persons at home. So you had more persons at home, so you had more persons doing cleaning and so forth. However, we also had an increase in rubbish fires from 86 rubbish fires to 103. Now, someone might want to know what is the difference between a bushfire and a rubbish fire, because a lot of times persons call and they might say it is a bushfire. However, when we do get to the scene of these fires, it's actually a rubbish fire. Now, for it to be classified a bushfire, it has to be within still living vegetation. Okay? Mm-hmm. So if you would have cut branches from a tree, you would have gathered leaves and so forth, you have a heap of dry plant material and you ignite that. When we get it, that would actually become the rubbish fire. It is not a bushfire because it did not get into the growing reality. So that's how you differentiate it. So what I can say is that we did have a major increase in those two categories. And from our analysis, we believe it was based on the fact that more persons were at home due to the emergency lockdown, due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Idle hands becoming the devil's workshop?
Well, I wouldn't say idle hands. I think a lot of persons were doing so bona fide, but they were not actually practicing the correct procedures.
Right.
And I would like to put on record the fact that we've been getting a number of calls with persons calling the fire department requesting permission to burn. Now, the fire department does not give permission to burn. And that is important to note. We do not give permission to burn. What we ask is that persons adhere to the laws of Grenada. And one such legislation speaks to is the Agricultural Fires Act, which can be found in Chapter 6 of Volume 2 of the 2010 Continuous Revised Laws of Grenada. Now, what the law speaks to is that persons who are using lands for agricultural purposes, so whether you're already planting or you're in the process of preparing such property and you want to burn for some reason or the other, what it requires you to do is visit one of your extension offices or the Ministry of Agriculture and make an application to get a license to burn. Now, the extension officer or his designate would actually come either decide if they have knowledge of the property to issue you or refuse you that license, or send someone to do an inspection of that premises and thereafter decide whether or not to grant or refuse you that license. So that is for agricultural purposes. And I want persons to understand that. A lot of persons call and they're cleaning their backyard and so forth, and they call the fire department requesting a license. Now, secondly, we have what is known as the use of fire. And that is Section 146 and 147 of the Criminal Code, which is Chapter 72A. What it speaks to is informing neighbors who own property or are in charge of property that may be affected by a fire when you light say. So once you clean in your backyard or so forth, sometimes you do construction or so forth, and you got bits of bone that you need to get rid of. What the law speaks to is informing neighbors. Now, what I have observed or what I have experienced personally is that someone would call and they have that problem where they do not require a license, so it's not agricultural purposes. So they call in, they ask for permission, and I would inform them, or one of the other officers at the station would inform them, listen, the fire department does not give permission. However, what you need to do is inform your neighbors. You inform your neighbors and you come to some agreement as when might be the best time to burn. And as we said earlier, there are more persons home because of the COVID-19. So, and these days you have a number of persons with respiratory problems, asthma, sinus, and allergies, and those type of things. So the smoke, a lot of times the fire itself doesn't affect these persons, but the smoke from these fires, and whether it be a small fire or big fire, the smoke can do a lot of harm. You have a lot of persons going to hospitals and so forth. So what we advise you to do is ensure that you inform your neighbors. Now, what we will tell you is that you adhere to the law, so you will have informed your neighbors, but still you have to ensure that you take proper measures. So measures like burning in small heaps. When you burn in small heaps, it's much easier to manage. Now, if that fire is getting out of control, it's quite easier for you to put out that fire. But if you use a very big heap and the fire gets out of control, then it's very hard for you to manage. And in most instances, that is when you would have to call in the fire department. Besides burning in small heap, we advise that you do not burn on windy days. Because if the wind is really high and you set a fire, the wind can take pieces of burning debris and throw it into some dry bush or so forth or someone else's property, and it can have what we know as spot fires. So we advise that you do not burn on a windy day. Now, there's no wind you decide to burn, you have a small heap, still we advise that you have water handy, you have water available. So whether it be a hose close by, also for a drum of water, you have water and sufficient water that will be able to extinguish that fire if the wind picks up or so forth, and you need to put it out. So we want persons to understand that. And most importantly is that you never leave a fire unattended. A lot of persons, whether it be a small fire in your backyard, you turn your back on it, and sometimes you hear they say, well, I lit the fire and I just turned my back to go inside to get some water, and when I come back, it started spreading to the neighbor's property. So you never leave it unattended, and when you're burning in these small heaps, you want to ensure that you clear totally around those small heaps. So because you wouldn't have that fire creeping out of that heat that you would have originally set on fire.
So the whole conversation regarding burning, that should be a timed, planned event.
Yes. Right. So I normally advise persons. The law doesn't speak to you informing the fire department, but it's still precautionary that you decide you're going to burn. You inform your neighbors. So you say, okay, neighbor, I have some bits of board that I would have used during the construction of my home, and I want to get rid of it, because sometimes a lot of persons, they have issues with the rodents and so forth. If they leave the bits of wood, rodents would go and live in it and other pests. So they might want to get in and genuinely and bona fide cause, they want to get rid of it. So they speak to you and you say, okay, listen, I would not be home on Wednesday. Sometimes the only neighbor or maybe two neighbors around, and they say, okay, we wouldn't be home on Wednesday, so you can go ahead and burn. But still, you have to ensure that you take the necessary precautions. And I always advise persons that you still call the fire department. You can call the fire department to let them know, listen, I would have taken all the necessary precautions and I'm going to light a fire, but I'm still calling to inform you, because sometimes what happens in some cases, you might have someone passing in a vehicle, they observe the smoke, how it illuminates, because someone might have a fire burning behind their home, and it illuminates, and someone might think the house itself is on fire.
Right.
So if you call in and you let us know that, you give us your information, you leave a telephone number, we get a call in that area. Sometimes what we can do, even though we rang the bell, persons are coming down to live with the appliance, we still make a follow-up call, and you might be able to say, yes, that is my area. It is me burning the fire, it's control. I do not need you to respond. Right? Because sometimes you get there, and when you get there, it's a small fire. We had instances where someone was actually cooking on a fireside, and we would have responded. Imagine the speed and all the resources that it took to respond to those fires. So it's simple and easy. If you take those things into consideration, it makes life much easier for all of us.
The response to a fire, in terms of, and I'm referring to the immediate response, is the treatment the same, once there's a fire, or do you try to ascertain whether because you did make mention of two different types of fire? If it's a bush fire, and there was a second one you made reference to.
We spoke about a bush and a rubbish fire, which
Right.
actually is in close proximity to each other, right? In terms of fires, once we get information relative to a fire, we sound the alarm by ringing the fire bell at the station. And persons, well, most persons, they might be, sometimes they're downstairs in the office, or you might be upstairs in the barracks or so forth. Sometimes you have persons engaged in lectures and drills. So once the bell is rang, then these persons will proceed to the area where they get the protective equipment and then onto the appliance. Someone would come to get some information relative to where the fire is. So that's why sometimes also we ask that persons don't just call and say a fire in, let's say, Panchoo or Cherry Hill. And I use those two villages specifically because we have had two experiences where persons would have called and said those two areas. However, you have a Panchoo in Carriacou, a Cherry Hill in Carriacou, and you have a Panchoo and Cherry Hill here in Grenada. So now that leaves the person answering the phone to wonder, where exactly am I going? I recall in Grenville, someone called and said poultry. And we have a poultry down Maki side, and you have a poultry up Tivoli side. So we ask persons, don't just call and say fire in this area without any other information. Try to, and a lot of times you try to ascertain information from the person. You ask them questions. Okay, where is it? We're looking for a landmark, because it's not the fact that fire personnel will know every little nook and cranny of Grenada.
Right.
Right? And in some instances, not all the time that the fire will be illuminated, so you'll be able to see the smoke. Sometimes it's a fire that is taking its time and burn. Sometimes it is within a structure. If it's a concrete structure, a lot of times, sometimes you don't see fire when you get there. So we ask persons to give information. So once the persons get down, you have a location for the fire. They proceed to the scene of the fire, and on their way, while the person who answered the phone is getting more information, they will transfer that call to the persons, in most instances via radio or via telephone, and the persons will be able to ascertain exactly where the fire is.
And I'm saying it is important to underscore that, because very often, in attempting to get information, the person that is communicating with it, that's calling, they may sometimes tend to get agitated. Why are you asking me,
Yes.
officer, I'm just telling you that there is a fire.
I'm reporting a fire. Why you want to know my name? Why you want to get a telephone number? But we need a telephone number, so that sometimes you get to the area and sometimes the fire has died down. That doesn't mean it does not still require a response or some attention by the fire department. And in some instances, you might have a fire and you might have extinguished it, but still you need a fire personnel to come there to get a record of what happened, because sometimes you want to claim for insurance purposes. Right? So we would want to call back to say, okay, we are in the area, we're not seeing a fire. Can you give us direction? Can someone come out? Because sometimes it's an inside road. So we need to get as much information as possible to ensure that we are able to respond in the quickest time possible.
Do you get the sense, though, even with the increases that you've made mention of in 2020, do you get because I know the fire department, it has in the past and continues extensively on its public awareness campaign. We've had you on a million times, and other individuals. Do you think the message, and holistically, I mean,
yes,
you talk about last year with more persons being home, and I can well appreciate that. You know,
yes,
boy, I might as well keep myself busy. Let me clean out. Let me do that.
Yeah.
But do you think the message that you have been trying to send home in recent times, that persons have been buying into it?
Yes, I believe that, because though I spoke about the increase in terms of bush and rubbish fires, generally in terms of structural fires, and when we speak about structural fires, we're speaking about dwelling house and business house fires, we have had a decrease of over 10%. Right, so we had a 10% decrease in the number of dwelling house and structural fires. So though we had a general increase in the number of fires, bush and rubbish and so forth, in terms of structural fires, we have had a decrease, and that speaks very well to persons actually adhering to some of the information that we're being given. As I said before, and a lot of times when I speak to the media, one fire is always too much, but still we need to ensure that we put things in place to keep ourselves as safe as possible.
And I guess naturally persons would be a little bit much more careful. They would exercise greater caution in terms of their engagement inside of their dwelling home. You know,
yes,
if you're outside, you tend to throw caution to the wind. Well, I'm outside. But that
yes,
itself has its... Why are we on the issue of fires within the dwelling home? Based on your research, your investigations, what are some of the more common causes of fires and how can they be prevented?
Okay, so we would have seen a number of fires due to electrical origins. Sometimes you have some starting from electrical fans and so forth. We have seen that. And what we want to admonish persons is that it has been recommended that from time to time, every 5 to 10 years, that you have your electrical installation checked by a qualified technician, electrical technician. A lot of persons they do the electrical installation. Normally, as we say in local parlance, you wire your house, and you're living in the house 20, 40 years, and you never ever check your electrical installation. Right? So we asking persons to have it checked. And when you do have a malfunction, like you have a breaker tripping regularly, or you have some electrical appliance malfunctioning, we ask that you get a qualified electrician to come and check those issues. Because a lot of times breakers trip, and all the person does is that they just flip back on a breaker. In some instances, you had your house wired to facilitate a certain load. However, you add certain things to it. So you might add an additional ceiling fan, you might add water heater and so forth, and that goes back to the same breaker, the same load that it was not originally. The electrical installation was not installed for all this load, so that from time to time you would have the breaker tripping and so forth, and you need to get someone to check that. As I said, someone qualified. Right, so I want persons to bear that in mind. So we have had electrical origin. In some instances, we had the unfortunate instances where children were playing with either lighters and matches and so forth.
With lighters?
Lighters. And from ever since as a little boy growing up, you always hear persons say, ensure that you put matches and lighters in areas where children cannot reach. And that has not changed. It has not changed from the 1990s to present. Constantly remind yourself that you have to ensure that you have lighters and cigarette lighters away from where children can play with. Because what we have noticed is that when children play with those items, they go underneath the bed, sometimes underneath the house and those places, and they play with the matches and the lighters. And when a fire starts, instead of them come to report it to you, they will be running away. And before you know it, that fire would have actually engulfed your home. So we want persons to bear that in mind. Now, an issue that I have observed is a lot of the times we have persons building homes, right? And we know what it is in Grenada. Sometimes it's where you have a piece of property that you would build your home, but it's not very accessible to fire appliances. And a lot of the times the fire department comes on the lash for that, because when we get there, we're not able to access it. Sometimes we have to run maybe 10, 11 lengths of hose to get to where you are. And think about a one-story wooden structure, maybe 20 by 24. You have a house that is painted, and these things are quite combustible. And when you paint it, what they use to actually treat the wood also is actually like an accelerant. So once a fire starts, before you can think about it, within 10 minutes the entire house is engulfed in flames. What I want to admonish persons, yes, that might be where you have your home, but you have to start to think fire safety. One, have a family emergency plan. Right? A lot of persons don't do that, and speak to your children about fire safety. And secondly, once possible, have an early warning device. An early warning device such as a smoke or a heat detector. Right? If you have that, it would sound an alarm in the initial stage of a fire so that you can take some kind of action before the house actually is engulfed in flames. Right? Because we do have a lot of issues when it comes to access. Some areas the road is very small. Some people, they build houses on hills and so forth. Right. And then we have the whole issue of a lot of motorists and vehicle owners parking on the side of the road, not leaving allowances for emergency vehicles. Well, the fire appliances are the biggest emergency vehicles that we have in Grenada. A lot of times you get there and you have to call people out of their home to come and move a vehicle and so forth, because you cannot pass with the appliance. So these are some of the challenges that we have when we go to some of these fires. Right? And sometimes the fire department comes under a lot of tongue lashing, but we ask persons, especially the motorists, besides just parking, also what we observe is that a lot of persons, it's like they're actually trying to race with the emergency vehicles. The law speaks to pulling up to the left of the road and giving way to emergency vehicles, whether it be a fire appliance or an ambulance or so forth. But a lot of persons are not doing that. What I have observed though is a lot of persons, and that means also some persons they drive with the windows up with the AC on, some of their music playing. But that speaks to to them not using the mirrors also, because once the siren is on, the revolving lights are on.
See.
So if you don't hear the siren, because a lot of persons sometimes they say they didn't hear the siren, but if you're using your mirrors and glimpsing back ever so often, you will see the revolving light and you will give way. So we want persons, when you are going for your driving license, these are the things that you learned in the traffic code, in the highway code. Excuse me. So just continue practicing it. Right, and it'll make things much easier for all of us.
I know I've had conversations with the folks in traffic, and I've always intimated to them that that's one of the challenge, that individuals, they study down to the letter of the law for the exam, and once they get the license,
they get the license,
Zafed that, as they say. We're running out of time, Panchoo. Let me, as we are on a conversation about domestic fires.
Yes.
Let's offer some general tips. I am at home, a fire starts. Maybe from a different source, but how should we then proceed as a homeowner? What should I do?
Okay, so I spoke about having an emergency plan, right? Having a home emergency plan. A lot of persons in your workplace, you have an emergency plan. You know exactly what to do, how to do it, and so forth. Just so at your home, you should have an emergency plan. You inform your children and you practice it. Just as business places have evacuation drills, you practice it with your children.
Right.
You get up in the middle, you let them know you get up in the middle of the night and the house is filled with smoke. Where do you try to get out? How do you get out? Right? You advise them get on their hands and their knees because hot air rises, so there will be always a greater concentration of oxygen lower to the ground, right? To get out. Right? We spoke about early warning devices, but added to that, you might have the smoke detectors and so forth. Another important part of firefighting equipment to have is an extinguisher. Right? But you only fight a fire in the initial stage with an extinguisher. So you have an extinguisher, you realize there's a fire. If you're able to control it, you try to use the extinguisher. Now, one of the things to note is that you call the fire department before you try to extinguish the fire. A lot of the times, what persons try to do is try to extinguish the fire and then call the fire department. That time, the fire is maybe twice or three times the size that it was original. So if you call the fire department and you then try to extinguish the fire, we are already on our way. We already set that process in motion. Right? So if you got it under control, you can always call back to say, listen, officer, I would have gotten the fire under control. So you don't need to respond. Maybe you can send a fire officer just to look at the damages because I might want to call and claim for insurance purposes and so forth. But what is most important, right? Taking away from all of this is your personal safety. Person's personal safety. Life comes before property. Right? So the first thing that you would want to do is get your children or any other occupant of the house out to safety. So you have a fire at home, you get other persons, whether it be at home, your business place, you get persons out to safety, and you only try to extinguish that fire if it is safe to do so. And you have the necessary, as I said, equipment, so you have an extinguisher or so forth. And if some people, they might believe they have a hose. A lot of times, a lot of persons, they try to extinguish fires with hose, and they do so with the risk of being electrocuted because the house is still energized with electricity. Right? So these are some of the things that persons need to take into consideration whenever there's a fire at home, but bear in mind that life is always most important, right? And once you get out, don't go back in for any item. A lot of persons, we have had persons who got injured going back in for items. We have children trying to go back in for toys, tablets, and so forth. Adults, remember, they have money inside and those type of things, and you go back in trying to save property and you get injured.
I'll throw a last one because it's 25 minutes past the hour. So I wake up in the middle of the night, the place is dark, and then yes, we talk about having a family plan, and it's important to know the layout of your house in the night just the same. And I guess all of that would come as part of the drill process. There is, so I noticed the fire is in the kitchen or whichever part. I observe that. So I try to get the folks away from the fire. What do I do? Should I just evacuate the building? Because you did talk about calling fire services. In the meantime, because of the circulation of it, is it a prudent thing to try to open up the house?
No. All right. What you want to do is close all doors and windows as much as possible, because what you will actually be doing is you will be cutting down on the amount of oxygen that fire gets, because a fire needs oxygen, right, to continue burning. So and what will happen if you leave doors and windows open? With the wind blowing through, you have an influx of oxygen, the fire would rage more, and actually with the doors and windows open, you would actually be able to spread throughout the house, especially a wooden structure. But when you have the doors and windows closed, you would actually eliminate some of this oxygen, right? So you have less oxygen for the fire to use to develop. And then again, the doors would become barriers to the fire. So you would have to burn through the door before you can spread to another room. However, with the door open, it would just spread right through.
Indeed, timely information from you, Officer Panchoo. Remind folks of there is emergency numbers and some of the main numbers for the fire stations at different points, if you have them at hand.
Okay, so if you do not know the number, and a lot of persons, what they would do, they would panic. All right, you can call 911, which is actually police control, right? And they would actually send all the information to the relevant station. And that's why I said it's important that you give proper information and directions. Because if you just call and you say Boucheju, I at 911 would call fire headquarters. Fire headquarters is 440-2112, right? Or you can call 435-7270.
Right.
So fire headquarters 440-2112-2112 or 435-7270. So that is for fire headquarters. If you want to get Grenville, you call 442-7224. That is for Grenville. Right? You want to get Sauters, 442-1328. You'll be able to get the Sauters fire station.
But when all else fails, you just go 911, universal number.
Yes, 911 it would be easiest for persons to remember. I can't remember if persons remember a movie that there were two children sent to make a phone call and one was asking the other one, what is the number for 911? That can happen to real fast. That can actually happen, because in the heat of things, persons panic and but just remember in 911, you will be able to access some sort of assistance from the fire department.
And I don't know how much the technology has evolved, but I think I am almost right if I should say that 911, I think it is actually, you can dial it from off of your mobile phone even without credit.
Yes, it's a free call.
It is a free call.
Yes, it is a free call.
And I think it does allow you to dial it even if your phone is locked.
Yes. Most mobile devices that I have encountered,
yes,
even though your phone is locked,
it allows you those numbers.
Once you tap and you tap 9, it allows you to dial out.
So those are things, it's critical information to know, because people might thinking, boy, I don't have credit, how can I call, or what is going to happen to my phone? And as you say, in the confusion, your phone locked, you're trying to remember first to unlock, losing precious time. It's an emergency, hit 911. Locked or not locked, credit or no credit, the call is in fact going to go through.
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Sergeant Adrian Panchoo, and I know, Sergeant, that this is just going to be one of our many engagements that we're going to have during the year. I'm thinking as time progresses, maybe we can organize to have some practical sessions where we can show individuals what to do, even maybe at the point of learning first aid in peradventure that something happens in home. But again, we say thank you and wish you all the best, and we'll continue to have these conversations as the year progresses.
Okay, thank you very much. And that is something that we can actually take into consideration, the practical part, because February would be the fire month. So we'll be looking to engage the general public more, and where we cannot really do the face-to-face, something like that would actually help us by leaps and bounds.
We will work on
Thank you again, Mr.
We'll
Joseph.
work on that collectively, comrade.
And on behalf of the officer in charge of the fire department, the Commissioner of Police, we want to thank you for having us this morning and for giving us the opportunity to send out such information. And to all listening and viewing public, we say all the best for 2021, and remember to be fire safe.
Always, you be fire safe as well. You have to make sure that you stay fire safe as well.
Yes.
Take care, Adrian.
All right, thank you.
11:30 in the morning time, the sound of Classic 105.5 and GBN Life Your Life on GBN. We'll take a quick commercial break, and I'll be right back with you.
Greetings, everyone. I hope this message meets you and yours in the best of health as we join in encouraging all to act responsibly.
COVID-19 presents the most serious
and deadly challenge
any of us will experience in our lifetimes.
We must act now.
We need to keep the Caribbean safe.
We can all help